The sound of water dripping from Marcus's mop echoed through the empty hallways of Pinnacle Industries like a lonely heartbeat. At 11:47 p.m., the corporate tower stood silent except for his quiet movements. A 34-year-old single father who had learned that dignity wasn't found in the shine of your shoes or the thread count of your suit, but in showing up every night to provide for the little girl waiting at home. Marcus Chen had been invisible for 3 years, not literally, of course, but in the way that maintenance workers often become part of the scene area, essential yet unnoticed, present yet unseen. He moved through the gleaming offices like a ghost, cleaning up after executives who made more in a day than he earned in a month. But Marcus didn't mind being invisible. Invisible meant stable. Invisible meant little Emma had dinner on the table and cartoon band-aids for her scrapped knees. What the daytime inhabitants of Pinnacle Industries didn't know was that Marcus held a degree in international business from Berkeley. What they couldn't see was the framed photo in his janitor's card, a picture of him accepting a scholarship to study abroad in Tokyo, his face bright with possibility. That was before life had other plans, before his wife Sarah's cancer diagnosis, before the medical bills that devoured their savings, before her death left him clutching a 3-year-old's hand at a funeral, promising her mommy he'd take care of their baby girl no matter what it took. So Marcus became invisible by choice, trading his business suits for janitorial uniforms, his conference rooms for supply closets, because being someone's invisible hero was better than being someone's absent father. Tonight felt different, though. The building hummed with an unusual tension. Earlier that day, whispers had rippled through the corridors about their mysterious CEO, Hiroshi Tanaka, finally arriving from Japan. In 3 years of working here, Marcus had never seen the man who owned the company, only heard stories. Tanaka was a legend in the business world, a billionaire who'd built his empire from nothing, but he was also known for his eccentricity, his intense shyness, and his refusal to speak English in public despite being fluent. As Marcus pushed his cart past the executive floor, he noticed a light still on in the corner office. Through the glass walls, he could see a figure hunched over a desk, shoulders rigid with exhaustion. It was nearly midnight. Even the most dedicated executives had gone home hours ago. Marcus hesitated. His job was to clean and leave, not to interfere with the lives of people who lived in a world he'd once been part of. But something about the solitary figure tugged at his heart, perhaps because he recognized the posture of someone carrying the weight of the world alone. He knocked gently on the glass door. The man looked up, and Marcus found himself staring into the tired eyes of Hiroshi Tanaka himself. The CEO appeared younger than Marcus had expected, maybe early 40s, with silver threading through his black hair and wearing a rumpled shirt that suggested he'd been working for days without rest. Tanaka's eyes widened slightly at seeing the janitor, but he said nothing. The stories were true. Yeah, he really didn't speak. Marcus held up his hands in a non-threatening gesture and spoke softly in perfect Japanese. Tanaka-san, sumimasen, asoko me tsukere samarisu, nanaka omate ring are ring and warimasen ka. The effect was electric. Tanaka's exhausted face transformed with shock, then something that looked like relief. For a moment, he simply stared at Marcus as if seeing a mirage. Anawa, Nihongo Godakairu no desu ka? Tanaka whispered, his voice rusty from disuse. Marcus smiled gently. Hi, Sakashi desu. Tokyo ni sandam shida. He explained that he'd lived in Tokyo, that he'd studied there, loved the culture and language. What happened next would become legend at Pinnacle Industries, though no one would believe it at first. Hiroshi Tanaka began to cry, not the silent tears of polite emotion, but deep, shuddering sobs that seemed to come from years of isolation. In rapid Japanese, the words poured out of him like water from a broken dam. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of running a company in a foreign country where he felt constantly misunderstood. He talked about board meetings where he sat silent not from arrogance, but from paralyzing anxiety about his accent, his grammar, his fear of being judged. He revealed how he'd been working 18-hour days trying to save the company from a hostile takeover, how he hadn't slept in 3 days, how he felt like he was drowning in a world where no one understood him. Marcus listened without judgment, occasionally offering gentle words of encouragement in Japanese. He understood isolation. He understood the weight of responsibility. He understood what it felt like to be invisible in your own life. Tanaka-san, Marcus said finally, sometimes we become so focused on being strong that we forget it's okay to be human. That's when the unexpected happened. Security had been doing their rounds and noticed the unusual scene of the CEO who never spoke to anyone having an animated conversation with the night janitor. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered outside the office, security guards, a few late-working executives who'd heard the commotion, and even the cleaning supervisor who'd been called in. They watched in stunned silence as their notoriously silent CEO spoke rapidly in Japanese with a janitor they'd barely noticed for 3 years. But Marcus was no longer thinking about the audience. He was thinking about the broken man in front of him who reminded him of himself on those first terrible nights after Sarah's death, when the weight of single parenthood felt impossible to bear. You know, Marcus said, switching to English but keeping his voice gentle. My wife used to tell me that we're all just walking each other home. Sometimes the path gets dark, and we need someone to help us find our way. Tanaka looked up, understanding flickering in his eyes despite the language switch. Your English is perfect, Marcus continued, but that's not what matters. What matters is that you're trying to carry everything alone. Even the strongest people need help sometimes. The crowd outside had grown larger, but Marcus ignored them. This moment wasn't about theme, it was about human connection, about seeing someone when they felt invisible. I have a daughter, Marcus continued in Japanese. She's 6 now. Every night when I come home from cleaning these offices, she asks me about my day. And you know what I tell her? I tell her that everyone has a story, everyone matters, and everyone deserves kindness. Even the powerful CEO who sits in the corner office and feels alone. Tanaka wiped his eyes, his composure slowly returning. How did you know? He asked in careful English. Because I've been there, Marcus replied simply. Different circumstances, same feeling. When my wife died, I thought I had to be strong enough for both of us, me and my daughter. But strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about accepting help when you need it and offering it when you can. The next morning, everything changed. Marcus arrived at work expecting to be fired. Instead, he found a handwritten note on his card in both Japanese and English asking him to come to the executive floor, not to clean, but to talk. When the elevator doors opened, he found the entire executive team waiting in the conference room. At the head of the table sat Hiroshi Tanaka, looking more rested than he had in months. Marcus-chan, Tanaka said clearly, his accent slight but his confidence growing. I would like to offer you a position as our Director of International Relations. But first, I have a question. Marcus stood frozen, mop still in his hand. Would you be willing to help bridge the gaps between cultures, to help others feel less alone in a foreign place? The room fell silent. Marcus thought about Emma, about the stability he'd worked so hard to build, about the risk of leaving the invisible safety of his janitorial work. Then he thought about the man who'd cried in his office last night, and all the other people who felt invisible in their own lives. On one condition, Marcus said finally, I need to be home by 6 every day. I have a little girl who needs her dinner and help with homework. Tanaka smiled, the first genuine smile anyone in the company had ever seen from him. Of course, family comes first, always. The story spread through Pinnacle Industries like wildfire, then beyond. Not the corporate fairy tale of the janitor becoming an executive, but the deeper truth about what happened when two people chose to see each other's humanity in a moment when both felt invisible. Marcus kept his janitor's uniform hanging in his new office as a reminder, not of where he'd come from, but of the lesson it had taught him. Dignity isn't determined by your job title or salary, it's determined by how you treat others when you think no one is watching. 6 months later, Pinnacle Industries had not only survived the hostile takeover but had become known as one of the most inclusive, culturally diverse companies in the country. Tanaka spoke regularly at board meetings, his confidence growing with each presentation. The company implemented programs for employees struggling with language barriers, cultural adaptation, and work-life balance, and every evening at 5:45, Marcus Chen packed up his briefcase and headed home to a little girl who didn't care if he was a janitor or an executive. She only cared that Daddy was home for dinner and bedtime stories. On quiet nights, when he walked past the corner office, Marcus sometimes remembered that moment when two invisible people chose to see each other. It hadn't changed the world, perhaps, but it had changed their world. Sometimes, that's enough, because in the end, we're all just walking each other home, carrying our burdens and our dreams, hoping someone will notice when we need help finding our way. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that someone is just a heartbeat away, holding a mop and speaking words of kindness in whatever language the heart needs to hear.